Hi, this is the second part of 8.1, which is completing the square. So you'll notice at the top of your handout that you've got some direction to do this by all these steps. So let's go ahead and look at the first step. So the first step says, isolate the terms with variables on one side of the equation and arrange them in descending order. Okay, they are in descending order, but it says isolate the variables. So 3 is not a variable. That means we need to subtract it and move it over here. So remember, this is called completing the square. I'm sorry, I kind of skipped right over that. So we've got x squared plus 8x is equal to a negative 3. Okay. Then step 2 says divide both sides of the coefficient by x squared if the coefficient is not 1. Well, our coefficient is 1, so we can skip step 2. If it, for instance, was a 4, then we would have to do that, but it's just a 1, so we can skip step 2. So then it says, number 3, complete the square by taking half of the coefficient of x and adding its square to both sides. So half of 8 is 4, and then it wants us to square it, which would be 16. So now we have x squared plus 8x plus 16 is equal to, and it said to do that for both sides, so we now have 16 minus 3 on the right. Okay, so again, we took half of 8, which is 4, and we squared it. So 4 squared equal to 16. Okay, all right. Okay, and then let's see what our next step would be. 16 minus 3, so we have 13 on the right. And then it says, express the trinomial as a square of a binomial, which basically means factor the trinomial, and then simplify the other side. Well, I've simplified this side, and so now I would simply factor this. So, 4 times 4 is 16, and then if I added 2 4s together, I'd get 8, right? So we've got x plus 4, x plus 4, and that would equal 13. To simplify this, we would just use one parenthesis and put a square around it. So we've got x plus 4 is equal to 13. Now I hope that this looks a little bit familiar to the last part that we did just a few minutes ago in the other part of 8.1. So this is squared. This is not a square root yet. So we need to say x plus 4 is equal to the square root of 13. Okay, and then we would take away 4. So it's going to be minus 4 plus or minus the square root of 13. And that's equal to x. 13 can't be factored, so there's no other simplification to that, and that's going to be your final answer. So it's either x is equal to a negative 4 plus 13, or x is equal to a negative 4 minus 13. Very good. All right, so let's look at example number 1, which I did type out step to step. I'm just hoping I didn't make any typos. Okay, so looking at example 1, we've got x squared minus 6x plus 2 equal to 0. Okay, our first step says isolate the terms with the variables on one side of the equation and arrange them in descending order. They already are, aren't they? And it does say to isolate the variables, which means we can take away the 2. So we now have x squared minus 6x is equal to a negative 2. Step 2 says divide both sides by the coefficient of x squared. Our coefficient is just 1, so we don't need to do that step, so we're going to go ahead and look at number 3. Complete the square by taking half of the coefficient of x, so half of 6, and then squaring it. So half of 6 would be 3. Squaring 3 would give us 9. And then it says adding that to both sides. So we would have x squared minus 6x plus 9 is equal to 9 minus 2. Okay. And then the next step tells us to factor. So if we factor this, we're going to have x minus 3 and x minus 3. 9 minus 2 is 7, so on the right we have 7. We can simplify this by taking away one of those parentheses and just squaring the other one since they're exactly the same. So we should have parenthesis x minus 3 squared is equal to 7. Okay, so we would take the square of this, and then we would find the square root of 7. Then we would add 3. So now we have 3 plus or minus the square root of 7. And that's equal to x. I'm going to rewrite that so it's a little bit better. Great. All right. I'm going to leave the You Try It 1 for you to do on your own. And let's go ahead and look at example 2. So example 2 is on page 2 of your handout. And it begins 5x squared plus 3x minus 6. So we have 5x squared plus 3x minus 6 is equal to 0. Okay, so the first thing we would need to do is remember to isolate those variables, which means we've got to add 6 to both sides. So we've got 5x squared plus 3x is equal to a positive 6. Okay. Then we look at our coefficient in front of the x squared, and there's actually a number other than 1. So that means we're going to divide all parts by 5. So we end up having 5x squared divided by 5, 3x divided by 5, and 6 divided by 5. Okay, all right. So this one, of course, cancels out, so now we have x squared plus 3/5 x is equal to 6/5. Our next step tells us to take 1/2 of 3/5. So 1/2 of 3/5, don't let the fact that they're fractions scare you. That just means 1/2 times 3/5. So 1 times 3 is 3, 2 times 5 is 10. So 1/2 of 3/5 would be 3/10. Then the second part of this is to square it. So that means times 3/10. 3 times 3 is equal to 9, and 10 times 10 is 100. We're going to add 9 over 100 to both sides of the equation. 9 over 100. So we have x squared plus 3/5 x plus 9 over 100 is equal to 9 over 100 plus 6 over 5. Okay, so now we need to factor this. So we need to end up with 2 parentheses. So if you think about what number would give you a 3/5 when you add it with the factors of 9/100. That's what we're trying to figure out right now. Okay, so if you think about the square of 9, which is 3, the square of 100, which is 10, and if we were to add that twice, 3 plus 3 is equal to 6/10. If we reduce that, we get 3/5. So it has to be 3/10. So it would be x plus 3/10, and you're going to have another parenthesis just like that, so that means we're just squaring it. So we have x plus 3/10 squared, and that's equal to, well, now over here we need to add 9/100 plus 6/5. 100 could be our denominator. We just need to change 6/5 into a denominator with 100. So I will do that over here. So 6/5 is equal to how many 100s? 5 goes into 100 20 times, and 20 times 6 is 120. Okay, so now instead of 6/5 here, I'm going to erase that and put plus 120/100. So 9 and 120 is 129, and that's over 100. Okay, I wish I had a bigger board, but I don't. So I'm going to erase the top part and erase the middle part. And so now I've got, this simplified would be x plus 3/10 is equal to, we need to add a radical sign to that part, 129/100. Okay, you're probably noticing that the 100 is a perfect square, so we could simplify this, and you're exactly right. This would simplify to 129/10, with the 129 still in the radical sign. 129, let's see, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's divisible by 3, but this is divisible by 3, but you'd get 3 times 43, and 43 is a prime number. So this would not be factorable any farther. And so, let's see. Did I get ahead of myself? Gosh, I never do that. Huh. So x is equal to 129/10. And, oh, I never took away the 3/10. Sorry about that. But I thought that I did. Go back in time. I just erased it like it was equals. So x plus 3/10. Yeah, I forgot I did that. Okay, so we'll take away the 3/10, and so we put it on this side, minus 3/10. So notice the denominator's exactly the same, so we don't really need 2 of those denominators like that. So we're just going to stretch the bar out and maybe move the 10 into the middle since it's not a radical. And so you have one answer of a -3 plus or minus the square root of 129/10, and that's your final answer. Okay, that looks kind of little. There we go. All right, so let's see. I do have your answers for the You Try It, and so I think you could try it and see what you get. You can follow the examples that I gave you. I gave you 3 examples, and so I think I'm going to let you try to do those two on your own. If you do end up having trouble, let me know, and during our Zoom talk, we can go over those on Wednesday, or if you want help Tuesday, I can also schedule a Zoom meeting or a FaceTime with you, okay? Great. Good luck with this part of 8.1.